Congratulations. You've just woken up in the year 1348, and whether you know or not, your body is no longer yours. There's something beneath your skin now, whispering secrets in a language of fever. Your mouth tastes like pennies. Your fingers are cold. You think it's just the weather. It's not. It's the plague. And no, it's not dramatic to say that. Because in this time, in this place, you don't get to be dramatic. The drama belongs to the rats, to the fleas, to the bloated corpses rolling gently in the river beside your village like logs that forgot how to float. You open your eyes on a straw bed that smells like mold, piss, and dried goat milk. The same blanket covers you that covered your grandmother before she died 3 days ago. No one's had the heart to burn it yet. Or maybe they just don't care. You cough. It's wet. Thick. A little metallic. You pretend it's nothing. It's never nothing in 1348. Your house is small, stone, thatched cold. The kind of cold that lives in your bones, not on your skin. You haven't eaten a proper meal in days, but you still have to go outside to relieve yourself in a hole surrounded by splinters and regret. Your breakfast? Stale rye, moldy cheese, and fear. Lots of fear. It's free and everywhere. Like the lice crawling in your shirt. You scratch the back of your neck. It's swollen. You scratch again. It hurts. You press your fingers to your jaw and feel a lump. A bubo, though you don't have that word yet. Just the pain. And then, from the edge of the village, you hear it. The bells. Not church bells. Those stopped weeks ago. The priest died screaming. No, this is the bell tied to the hip of a man in black. Cloaked. Tall. Slow. A silhouette moving like time itself. A plague doctor. You've never seen one up close. You've heard whispers that they're healers, that they're saints, that they're monsters. But you're about to find out that the line between those three is thinner than your skin. You stand at the window. He doesn't look at you yet. He moves house to house, poking bodies with a stick, tossing dried rosemary on the floor like it matters, like it will save anyone. And you're thinking, maybe if I just stay quiet, maybe he won't come in. But you're already coughing, and your mother saw, and your brother is pale, and your sister stopped waking up yesterday morning. You're a statistic before statistics exist. In a few hours, your skin will darken. In a few days, your breath will sound like you're drowning in your own lungs. You'll want water, and there will be none. And when he does come, the man with the beak, he will not say a word. He will write your name down, maybe. He will poke you once, maybe. He will pronounce you dying, definitely. And no, you don't get a second opinion. In 1348, medicine is equal parts guesswork, vinegar, and witch burning. Your body is just a battlefield for invisible forces. Evil humors, corrupted airs, punishment from God. And if you cry out for help, they might come. But not to save you, to board up the door. So here you are, lying on that straw bed, with a cough, a fever, and a future that's already been decided by a flea the size of sesame seed. And somewhere, not too far from here, the plague doctor is dipping his stick in oil. Not to cure, to mark, because he has already seen your house. He has already smelled the sickness. And now, he's coming for you. Sleep tight. You see him again at dawn. He's walking down the road, the mud sucking at his boots like it wants to keep him. He doesn't rush. He never does. Time means nothing to him now. He has outlived the hours, the days, the calendar itself. His steps are slow, mechanical, a metronome counting down your final breaths. At first, you think it's a bird. A massive, awful bird wearing a robe. But then the illusion breaks, and you realize that beak isn't feathered. It's leather, lacquered and stiff, designed not for flight, but for protection, or at least the idea of it. He wears black from head to toe, as if mourning every patient in advance. The robe is waxy, waterproof, and too warm for spring. He smells like smoke and rot and crushed lavender, a desperate attempt to mask death with perfume. as if that ever worked. On his face, or rather, where his face should be, there is the mask. Long-beaked, wide-eyed, utterly inhuman. The eye holes are round, cold glass. You can't see in, but you swear you can feel him seeing out. The beak curves down like a hawk's, like something that doesn't eat soup, but tears flesh. That beak is filled with herbs. They say rose petals, cloves, cinnamon, mint. The poor call it superstition. The rich call it science. The doctor calls it nothing at all. He doesn't explain, because when you look like death, you don't need to speak. His gloves are stiff, his hat wide-brimmed like the kind worn by executioners. Ironic, really, considering that's exactly what he is. An executioner with a stick and a bottle of vinegar. The stick comes first. Always. It's not to hit. Not usually. It's to measure. To prod. To keep your rotting skin from ever touching his. You could be a mother, a child, a priest, it doesn't matter. He won't risk your touch. Because he is not here for you. He is here for it, the plague. To contain it. To document it. Sometimes, if he remembers, to pretend to fight it. He passes the baker's house. You hear a knock. 1, 2, a pause. Then the sound of it being nailed shut. Someone just died. You don't ask who. There's no point. Names are for the living. And still he walks. He doesn't greet anyone. He doesn't nod. He's not here for manners. He's here for numbers. Tally marks in his little black book. The body is a ledger now, and you're either a debtor or a loss. There is no credit in 1348. You wonder if he has a face under that mask. You wonder if he's even still a man. No one's ever seen him eat, or speak, or sleep. Some say he never takes the mask off, that it fused to his skin long ago. That he wasn't hired. He just showed up, and never left. You saw a dog bark at him once. It stopped mid-growl, and backed away with its tail between its legs. Animals know. They always know. In the distance, children hide behind ruined walls, peeking out only long enough to whisper, "The Birdman's here," and then they vanish into the dust, as if afraid he might catch their names and write them down. You should go inside, but you can't, because as he walks, slowly he stops and turns right toward you. You feel it before you see it. That weightless pressure, like the air has decided you are no longer safe. Your throat tightens, not because you're sick, not yet, but because something about that stare behind the glass eyes of his mask feels too familiar, as if he knows you, or used to. He nods slightly, and just like that, you're marked. You close the shutters. You hold your breath, but it's too late. He's seen you, and now he's part of your story. You'll smell the herbs when he enters. You'll see the beak bend closer. You'll feel the stick tapping your chest like a priest giving last rites. And you'll wish, just for a second, that it really was just a bird. But it isn't. It's your doctor, and he doesn't heal. He only visits. Let's talk about the beak. That long, elegant curve, the shape of a scythe disguised as a nose. You've seen it in the dreams you don't talk about, in your sister's sketches, made with charcoal on the side of the hearth before she stopped drawing, in the eyes of the old woman who stopped speaking after her husband was treated. You were told it's for protection, that it filters the air, that the herbs stuffed inside it, rosemary, juniper berries, camphor, cloves, will stop the plague from crawling into the doctor's nostrils and laying eggs in his brain. That's the story, anyway. But you and I both know it's a lie, because there is no protection in 1348. Not from the rats, not from the blood, not from the coughing fits that sound like someone trying to scream underwater. The plague doesn't care about cloves. So why the herbs? Let's pull back the leather mask and peer into the mouth of the lie. The truth is, the beak is for them, not for him. It's not about stopping the sickness. It's about masking the smell, because death has a scent, not poetic, not symbolic, a literal, thick, syrupy stench that seeps from open wounds and blackened toes, from sweat-drenched beds, from skin that has decided to rot before its owner stops breathing. It's a smell that lingers in the nostrils like regret. It sticks to your clothes. It settles into your pores. It hums beneath your tongue until every bite of food tastes like corpse. And so, he fills the beak, not with science, but with comfort, to create a little distance between himself and the horror. He hides inside the scent of dried oranges and crushed mint. He builds a perfumed lie to survive another hour. Another house. Another body. But even that isn't the whole truth. Because sometimes he breathes deeply. Too deeply. Not like a man avoiding a smell, but like one feeding on it. Like a priest inhaling incense before a sacrifice. Like someone savoring something sacred. Some say he adds his own ingredients. Not just herbs, but powders. Bone dust. Dry blood. Something he calls memory ash. He says it helps him stay clear. But when he breathes it in, his hands twitch. He whispers Latin backwards. He writes names that haven't been spoken in centuries. You begin to wonder, what happens if he takes the mask off? Does he still have a face? Or has it collapsed inward, like the plague's favorite trick? Has his skin peeled away from fear or fused to leather? Is the beak a tool or a mouth? One widow said she saw him pull the herbs out after a long night. She said they were black, not just burned, but wet. She swore she saw something move inside the beak, like it was breathing on its own. But no one listened to her, because she was already coughing, because her lips had turned dark, because she was next. The truth is, the beak makes him more than a man. He wears it like armor, like ritual, like a second skin. The children say he was born with it. The elders say he'll be buried in it. And the doctor? He never corrects them, because lies, when repeated enough, become protection. Just like the herbs, just like the mask, just like the soft, sweet scent of lavender trying to cover the fact that the doctor has not stopped smiling since he arrived. The plague spreads. The doctor watches, and the beak, heavy with flowers and fiction, turns slowly toward your door. The lie is still breathing, and it's coming in. He never touches you, not even when you're begging. Not when your child is burning up and you're holding them out like an offering. Not when your hands are shaking, your voice cracking, and the last thing you want in this world is to die alone. Especially not then, because the plague doctor doesn't hold hands. He holds distance. His fingers remain hidden beneath thick leather gloves, stiff as bark, reeking of lye and vinegar. Gloves that creak when he moves. Gloves that might as well be carved from old bone. Gloves that look like they've never known softness. They are not for healing. They are for pushing, for inspecting, for closing the eyes of the dead without letting grief get too close. They are not his hands anymore. His real hands, if they still exist, are locked away beneath layers of fear and fabric, untouched by flesh since before the first cough. You think you want his hands to comfort you, but what you want is an illusion. Because if he ever touches you, really touches you, it means one of two things. You're already dead, or he has stopped pretending to care. You see, he's learned something from the plague. It doesn't touch. It spreads. It seeps. It invades. So he mimics it. He becomes the shape of dread, the silhouette at the edge of the room, the presence in the doorway that watches but never enters fully, never commits. He doesn't treat you. He assesses you. With his stick, his ledger, his silence. You cough. He pokes. You wince. He nods. That's it. And then comes the vinegar-soaked rag, pressed to your lips with a stick as if your breath might poison him, as if your very existence is contagious. He doesn't ask your name. He doesn't ask how you feel. He looks. He sniffs. He nods. And you're either sealed in or burned out. Some say there were doctors once who used to bleed you, touch your wrist, feel your pulse like lovers checking for truth. Not him. He doesn't want your pulse. He wants your status. Dying or not dying? Because that's the only question that matters now. He walks through homes like a ghost disguised as a man, never leaving footprints, never brushing against a curtain, never knocking over a chair. He's made himself smaller than death, more efficient, more forgettable, except for that stick. Ah yes, the stick. It's not ornate. It's not symbolic. It's not holy. It's practical, long, thin, and stained with everything that once lived. He uses it to lift your chin, to flip your blanket, to tap your chest, gently, as if marking wood for the coffin maker. And when you're still breathing, he pulls back like a painter unsatisfied with his canvas. When you're not, he turns to the wall and draws a quick mark, sometimes a cross, sometimes a circle, sometimes something that doesn't make sense to you, but makes perfect sense to whatever watches him from behind the mask. The villagers once asked why he wouldn't remove his gloves. He said, because once you touch death, it remembers you. And he's right. Touch is a contract, a dangerous one. It binds you to what's dying, invites it into your skin, into your sleep, into the part of you that still hopes for tomorrow. He can't afford that, so he watches, he pokes, he scribbles. And when you reach for him, trembling, sobbing, desperate, he leans back, not out of cruelty, out of necessity, out of fear, or perhaps out of something worse, habit. You want healing. He give you distance, because to him, your warmth is a weapon. Your tears are contagion. Your hope is a liability. He doesn't touch you, because if he does, he might remember what it feels like to be human. And right now, that's the most dangerous thing of all. There is no oath, no solemn promise whispered in candlelight, no trembling hand placed over a sacred text, no echo of Hippocrates carried on the wind. This plague doctor, your plague doctor, was never sworn in. He did not study at the University of Bologna. He did not sit for hours beneath stained glass saints, learning the humors of the body and the rhythms of the heart. He has never dissected a cadaver in a marble amphitheater while monks chanted nearby. He couldn't tell you where the spleen is, but he knows exactly how long it takes for your tongue to turn black once the fever hits. You see, he is not a man of medicine. He is a man of opportunity. Because when the plague came, when the physicians fled and the priests choked on incense, someone had to stay behind. And he stayed. Not because he was brave, not because he was good, but because he saw a role with no competition. He bought the coat. He stitched the mask. He read the leaflets passed around in taverns. Crude diagrams, rumors from Florence, theories about bad air and cursed stars. And then he knocked on a magistrate's door and said, "I can help." The magistrate, pale and panicked, said, "Are you trained?" And the doctor said, "I am willing." In 1348, that was enough. Willingness is a kind of miracle when the only other applicants are priests digging graves with their bare hands. So he was handed a contract, not in ink but in blood. Paid per body, paid per day, paid to disappear when the screams stop. There was no ceremony, no white robes, no garlands of laurel and the applause of scholars. Just a stick, a mask, and a map of houses marked with chalk. His oath is not to healing. It is to containment, to recording, to outlasting. He doesn't ask what ails you. He asks how many in the household. He doesn't say, "I'll try my best." He says, "Keep the doors shut." He is not a doctor in the way you understand the word. He is an executor of protocol, a midwife for death, a librarian of agony. Some say he once had a name, a real one, before the mask. Before the mask became his name. But even if he did, it's buried now, somewhere under the mounds of bodies. Somewhere in the contracts he signed with shaking hands. Somewhere between the coin purse he keeps tightly shut and the ledger he hides beneath his cloak. Because now he is something else. He is function. He is form without soul. He is what happens when you remove love from healing and leave only routine. No vows, No ethics, just a job. And yet, sometimes, late at night, when the air is still and the world is quiet except for the rats chewing through the dead, he opens his book, and beside the names and dates and symptoms, he writes little notes. Eyes open at death, still tried to pray, held child until final breath. Not for science, not for evidence, but perhaps for something else. Memory, guilt, or maybe grief. You will never hear him speak of it. He will never confess. He took no oath, and thus has no law to break. But sometimes, just sometimes, as he leaves your house with your name scribbled in his book, you see a slight tremor in his gloves. And in a world with no doctors left, maybe that's the closest thing to healing you'll ever get. Here's something you should understand about your doctor. He does not work for free. Not now. Not ever. He doesn't cure illness. Not really. But he calculates it. He measures it in coin. He invoices death. You may think that plague has reduced the world to ashes and prayers. You may think suffering has leveled us all into one great democracy of dirt. But no, even now, especially now, the economy lives, and it breathes through him. He never touches you, but he touches your purse. Or rather, your husband's, your father's, your neighbors if they're still upright and foolish enough to answer the door. He arrives not with hope, but with a rate sheet. A consultation? 2 florins. A visit to confirm you're still breathing? 3. Funeral certification, including a name scrawled on a parchment no one will ever read? 5. And that's before he charges for special services. Want your loved one treated with vinegar and myrrh? That's extra. Want the house fumigated with herbs that do absolutely nothing? Double that. Want him to lie to the authorities and say it wasn't plague? Now you're talking silver. But here's the real trick. He charges the living because the dead can't complain. Once you stop breathing, you stop matching. You're a name crossed off, a body to be carded, a symptom erased. He doesn't care how much you owe after that. Your debt dies with you, and so does his concern. So the urgency is yours, not his. You plead with him while your wife coughs behind you. You show him the few coins you've saved, the wedding ring you've not yet pawned, the wool blanket you haven't burned. He nods. He takes. He writes. And then he turns, disappearing back into the smoke. Sometimes he comes before the fever breaks. Sometimes he waits, just long enough for your desperation to ripen. He once charged a mother 10 florins to check her son's pulse. The boy had been dead for hours, but she didn't know, and he didn't tell her, because what she was really buying was closure, and that, too, has a price. And when he leaves, he does not thank you. He does not wish you well. He simply lifts his stick to the next house, the next door, the next beating heart foolish enough to believe that gold is protection. In a way, he's no different from the plague. He, too, waits for you to be afraid. He, too, feeds on your hope. He, too, leaves you colder than before. There are stories, whispers in the corners of burned-out homes, that he has more than money hidden beneath that cloak. Jewels, teeth, locks of hair, a pendant from a noble woman who died in his arms, though she never called his name. You see, death doesn't haggle, but he does. And when you think you've paid enough, when you think your coins have bought you mercy, he simply smiles behind the beak and tells you that you're still alive, which means you can still pay more. So go ahead, bring out the last of your bread, offer him your rings, offer him your sheep, your wine, your daughter's dowry. But don't ask him for grace. He doesn't carry that. He carries ledgers. He carries plague. And he carries the quiet satisfaction of a man who knows. In this world, even despair has a market value. It always finds him, eventually, no matter how tightly he laces the herbs into the beak, no matter how many layers of lavender, rosemary, or dried marigold he crams into the hollow of that mask. The rot always breaks through. It begins as a whisper, a trace on the edge of the air, like a memory, like something you smelled once in a dream and couldn't forget. But for him, it's no dream. It is the constant companion. The scent of rot follows the plague doctor like a shadow, soaked in spoiled meat. It clings to him, not just his clothes, but his soul, if he still has one. You may think death smells like nothing, but no, it has a texture, a weight, a taste, sweet and sharp, like fruit gone wrong, like pears fermenting in a cellar, mixed with the iron sting of blood and the thick stench of something that once was warm, now turning cold from the inside out. The smell curls around him in the dark. It seeps through the seams of his gloves. It lives in the fabric of his robe. And worst of all, it learns him. Some nights, after the last door is marked and the last cough is silenced, he stands outside the village, by the river, and strips down as far as he dares. He lays out the mask, the gloves, the hat. He wipes them, washes them, scrubs until his knuckles ache. He burns sprigs of juniper, hoping the smoke will lift the sickness from the cloth. But when he breathes in, it's still there, under the mint, under the sage, under every trick he knows. The rot remains, because it isn't just a smell anymore. It's a presence. It talks to him sometimes, not in words, not yet, but in flashes, in shivers, in the way a familiar house suddenly feels foreign, in the way the sound of weeping no longer stirs anything in his chest, in the way the sky seems heavier now, as if the very air is aware of him and recoiling. He once buried a child who had died without fever. No bubo, no cough, just stillness. She smelled like rot anyway. That's when he knew. The smell wasn't just the dead. It was him. It was inside the mask. Inside him. Not just a scent, but a residue. A reminder. A quiet voice beneath the clove and the cedar, whispering, "You belong to us now." You try to fight it once. Boiled vinegar. Salt. Lime. He even stuffed the beak with crushed coral someone sold him for too much coin, claiming it would purify the breath. It didn't. Nothing does. Because rot isn't a symptom anymore. It's an identity. It's how he knows who he is, where he's been, and what's left of him. Sometimes, when the wind is right, he smells it before he even enters a house, before the door creaks, before the cries stop, before the husband stares at the floor and says nothing because he's already seen what the doctor is here to confirm. The rot is a signal, a scent that says, "You're almost home." And that's the worst part, because lately, when he takes the mask off, alone, always alone, he doesn't gag anymore. He doesn't flinch. He breathes in deeply, slowly, and he feels something close to comfort, as if the rot were not a warning, but a lullaby, as if the stench of death has become his own perfume. The year is still 1348. The fever still grips the land. And yes, the bodies keep coming, but something else is spreading now. Something quieter, something colder, something entirely human. Suspicion. It creeps under doors faster than fleas. It slips between whispered prayers and rotting rafters. It settles into the eyes of neighbors who once shared bread and now won't even share a glance. Because it's no longer just the plague you fear. It's the sense that something else, someone else, is taking too much pleasure in the dying. And all of it centers on him. The doctor, the bird, the one in black. At first, it was easy to believe he was here to help. Why else would he stay when everyone else ran? But now, people are starting to notice things. Little things. Terrible things. A child goes missing. The doctor was seen in the alley the same night. The mother screams that her boy wasn't sick. The doctor says nothing. The ledger grows. A young man with only a scratch. No fever, no cough. Asks for help. The doctor nods, enters the home, and the door is shut. The next morning, the home is boarded. The young man is not seen again. A dog found the remains behind the smokehouse. The limbs weren't burned. They were arranged. Still, the villagers say nothing out loud. Not yet, but in the dark, over the flicker of guttering candles, the stories start to twist. He came before the fever started. He watches the healthy, not the sick. He knows who will die, even before the first symptom. And the worst whisper of all, he's not here to treat the plague. He's here to feed it. No one knows exactly how many die of the sickness anymore. Not because the bodies stop. Oh no, they pile higher every week. But because some of the deaths don't look like plague. Some are too clean, too deliberate, too missing. They call it the second plague now. The silent one. The one that wears boots and walks upright and knocks on doors long before the coughing begins. He's begun carrying a sack. A leather one, stitched with what looks like hair. No one's asked what's inside. No one dares. But someone saw something once. Just a glimpse. A girl swore she saw a hand slip out of the sack. Thin, pale, childlike, with blue fingernails, and gently tap the side of the beak before disappearing back inside. She hasn't spoken since. The town elder confronted him once. Stood tall with a rosary in one hand and a kitchen knife in the other. He said, "You're not what you claim to be." The doctor just stood there, silent, watching. 2 days later, the elder died. Not a plague. No bubo. No blood. Just vanished. His home was empty. Clean. Too clean. And the doctor? He wrote a note in his ledger. Reclassified. No symptoms. Still expired. You begin to feel it now. The village has changed. Doors don't just close, they lock. Children don't laugh anymore, they hide. Every knock at night sounds like the beak tapping. The smell of herbs doesn't calm you. It terrifies you, because herbs mean he's near, and his presence no longer brings the illusion of care. It brings the certainty of endings. This isn't about the plague anymore. This is about control. Selection. A dark arithmetic only he understands. The dead keep dying. But now, even the living feel like prey. And the worst part? You start to understand him. Because in a world where everyone is dying, what power it must be to choose who goes first. There's a house at the edge of the village. You know the one. Everyone does. It's the one with the shutters always drawn, even at noon. The one with the thin chimney that no longer smokes. The one where the wind seems to avoid the roof. As if even nature has decided it wants nothing to do with what happens inside. Once it was blue. You remember, faintly, seeing a young woman in the garden, pruning herbs with soft fingers and humming to herself. There were flowers, chickens, laughter, children's drawings scratched onto the wood with a charred stick. But now the blue is gone, swallowed by soot, by time, by whatever invisible hand pressed itself over that house and said, is the house the doctor uses, not for the sick, not for the dying, but for the uncertain. That's what he calls them. People who aren't coughing yet. People who say they're fine. People whose only crime is being afraid. He knocks once. He doesn't ask permission. He simply says, they need to be watched, just in case. And into the house they go, one by one, or sometimes entire families, siblings, lovers, infants too small to know what silence means. At first, the village believed him. Of course they did. He was the only one who stayed. The only one with a mask, with a method, with a voice that didn't tremble. But then they started watching, and waiting, and realizing. No one came back out. No one. No coughing. No screaming. Not even the sound of beds creaking or spoons scraping against bowls. Just stillness. And that smell. Not the familiar stench of sickness and filth, but something deeper, richer. Like meat left too long in a warm room. Like secrets marinated in silence. One boy, too curious for his own good, crept near the back wall one night. He pressed his ear against the wood. He said he heard breathing. Not shallow, not labored. Slow, measured, like someone sleeping or waiting. He never went back. You want to ask why no one forces the door open? Why no one drags the doctor out and demands answers? But then you remember, this is 1348. Justice is a dead man's word, and anyone who opposes the doctor ends up behind those shutters. So instead, the villagers have made peace with it. Sort of. They avert their eyes when he leads someone there. They pretend not to hear the lock click. They whisper prayers from their porches and hope the black mask keeps walking. There are rumors, of course, that he's experimenting, that he's draining blood into jars, that he's keeping them half alive to see what happens next. One girl swore she saw him bury something behind the house at dusk. But when they checked in the morning, the earth was untouched. Untouched, yet wrong. As if it had been patted down by hands that weren't quite hands. And then there are the sounds. Not often, not always, but sometimes at night when the moon is high and the crickets forget to sing. There's a faint hum from inside the house. Not a voice, not music, just humming. Low, rhythmic pulsing, like a lullaby for something unspeakable. And still, the doctor enters. Morning, noon, or night. Sometimes he carries buckets. Sometimes his ledger. Sometimes nothing at all. But he always leaves with the same expression hidden behind the beak. Satisfaction. What is he doing there? No one knows. No one wants to know. Because the house doesn't cough. It doesn't bleed. It doesn't beg. It simply absorbs. People. Time. Truth. It is not just a house anymore. It is a wound that doesn't close. A mouth that never chews but swallows. A chapter in the story that even death refuses to footnote. And somewhere, behind its rotting walls, the doctor is smiling. Not because he enjoys it, but because it works. Because fear is containment. Because silence is obedience. Because as long as that house stands, the village doesn't rise. And so you do what everyone does. You walk faster past it. You don't look. You don't ask. And you pray to a God who has long since abandoned this place. That your name is never followed by the words. Just in case. You told yourself it was your imagination. That the curve of the beak was always there. That the wide glass eyes had always been this bright. That the faint upward bend, that slight ripple at the edge of the leather. It wasn't a smile. It couldn't be, because masks don't change expression. Masks are fixed, still unmoving. But you've seen it, haven't you? You've seen it when he steps into a room and the air tightens. When a mother clutches her child and he pauses, just for a second, as if savoring the moment before the pleading begins. The mask doesn't grin, not in the way faces do, but in the way something inhuman does. Slow, stretching, deliberate. A shift so subtle it feels like a trick of the light, until you realize the light hasn't changed. It's him. It's the mask. And it's starting to respond. Once the beak was rigid, a lifeless protrusion, more protection than personality. But now it curls. Just a little. Just enough. As if it's aware of itself. As if, after hundreds of deaths, after enough rot and whispers and screams, the leather has grown hungry. Or worse, sentient. You notice it when he's watching someone too long. Not the sickest, not the dying, but the ones who fight it. The ones with tears in their eyes, fists clenched, still clinging to the illusion of choice. That's when the mask curls, as if mocking them, as if whispering, "You still think this is about you?" The villagers don't talk about it, because what is there to say? That the doctor's mask is smiling? That the stitched mouth has begun to smirk? They'd rather say nothing. They'd rather explain it away. It's a crease in the leather. It's just cracked from the heat. The shape warps in the firelight. But the fire is not to blame. The fire does not explain how it seems to smile wider at dusk. How the glass eyes gleam when it enters a home filled with the smell of fresh blood. How the mask leans in, closer than it ever did before, hovering just inches from a fevered face, almost intimate. And sometimes, when you think no one's watching, you see the doctor touch the mask gently, tracing the curve of the beak with one gloved finger. As if he, too, has noticed the change. As if he, too, is wondering whether the mask is still something he wears, or something that now wears him. And in your nightmares, because of course you have them now, the mask doesn't just smile. It laughs, a sound that comes not from lungs or throat, but from within the beak itself. A wheezing, clicking thing, like wind moving through dry leaves, like teeth that were never meant to chew. In your dreams, the mask leans down and whispers, "You were a face too once. You just didn't realize it." You wake up sweating. You tell yourself it's nonsense. But the next time you see him walking down the lane, slow, deliberate, with that same heavy stick swinging gently at his side, you look again at the mask. And this time, you can't unsee it. It is smiling. Not because there's anything to be happy about. Not because the plague is retreating. Not because he has found a cure. But because in a world where death is everywhere, power begins to look a lot like joy. And maybe, just maybe, the mask isn't mimicking emotion. Maybe it's finally revealing his own. Maybe it's saying, "You fear the plague, but you should have feared the man who never stops watching you." And still the smile grows. Not wide, not obvious, just enough. Enough to remind you, the mask was never lifeless. It was waiting. At night, he doesn't sleep. You thought he did. You hoped he did. Because sleep is human, and you needed to believe there was still something human beneath that mask. But no, he waits until the village goes quiet, until the last widow has locked her door and the last prayer has dried in the throat of the priest who no longer believes in mercy. Then he moves. He walks through the alleys like a shadow that remembers how to walk. He avoids the windows, not because he's hiding, but because he doesn't need to be seen anymore. He's already everywhere. And then he disappears into the house. You know the one. The same place where the uncertain go. The silent house. The house that does not cough. Inside, there is no screaming, no pleading, only the soft, rhythmic creak of floorboards and the gentle tick-tick-tick of glass tools being arranged on wooden tables. The villagers call it his workshop, though no one has ever truly seen it. Except for one, a grave digger, drunk and curious, peeked through a knothole in the boarded wall. He wept for hours afterward. Couldn't say what he saw, only that it was warm and wet and still moving. What we do know is this. He teaches himself, not for books. He stopped reading those long ago. They contradicted what his hands told him, and the hands never lie. So now he learns from flesh, from your neighbors, from your cousins, from the child who coughed once and was never seen again. By candlelight, he opens bodies, not with grace, not like a surgeon, like a man peeling fruit, like someone looking for a hidden message inside the ribs. He speaks as he cuts, not to anyone living, but to the body, to the muscles, to the veins that still twitch as if confused about whether they should keep working. The liver lies, the stomach sings, the heart forgets too easily. He speaks Latin, but not the kind you learn in church. This is older, crooked, sharp, the kind that feels like it doesn't want to be spoken out loud, the kind that stings the ears even if you don't understand words. His tools aren't surgical. They're personal, carved handles, bone blades, hooks made from ribs that weren't his to take. Some are too beautiful to be instruments. Some are too alive to be explained. He writes as he works, in a book that smells of tallow and rust. Not observations, declarations. As if he's not recording what he sees, but creating a new body by describing it differently. The lungs do not fail. They choose. The eye stores memory. Beneath the iris, regret. The plague is not in the blood. It is in the will. And sometimes he sings softly, melodies that don't match the region, tunes that don't belong here, words that make the candle flames sway sideways, as if sound itself has become an autopsy. Some say he's trying to discover something, a cure, maybe a pattern, a revelation. But if that were true, why do the bodies disappear? He doesn't bury them. The gravediggers say so. They haven't received a new corpse from him in weeks. And if you creep behind the house before dawn, you won't find fresh earth. Only footprints, small ones, dragging. You begin to wonder, is he learning from the bodies? Or learning how to make them speak? Because flesh holds memory. Because bone keeps secrets. And in the dark, under the flickering eye of the candle, he's not just a doctor anymore. He's a composer, tuning death into a language only he understands. And when he finally looks up, when he gently presses the lid shut over another pair of unblinking eyes, he whispers, "Thank you for your cooperation," as if the body volunteered, as if this was always meant to happen. You still believe the plague is the sickness, but he doesn't. Not anymore. The sickness is silence. The sickness is the rules. And tonight, under wax and blood and ritual, he's rewriting everything you thought a body could be, by candlelight. Her name has been forgotten, but the ribbon remains. A thin strip of cloth, ivory once, now dust-stained and fraying at the edges. You've seen it. Everyone in the village has. Tied around a nail above the doctor's door. No one asks why it's there, because the moment you do, you remember what they say. The ribbon belonged to a girl who never coughed. She was 12, maybe 13. Freckles, they say. Hair the color of wheat, left too long in the sun. A laugh that annoyed the elders, but made the chickens quiet down. Somehow. She danced near the bakery, barefoot, even when the frost bit. She sang nonsense songs to cats. She painted on her house with mud and plum juice and called it art. She was alive in the way that made death uncomfortable. And then she went missing. No cough, no fever, no symptoms, just gone. The mother knocked on every door, tore her voice raw screaming her daughter's name, dragged her shoes through mud and prayer, clutching at robes and sleeves and shadows for anyone who would help. But no one had seen the girl, except him, the doctor. He was seen speaking to her the day before. Not a long talk, not even a conversation, just a pause in the street. He leaned down. She tilted her head. He said something quiet, simple. She smiled, nodded, and followed. Some say he handed her a dried flower. Some say he took nothing but her gaze. And then she vanished. The doctor said nothing when asked. He didn't write her name in his book, didn't mark her door, didn't visit the family again. He simply began wearing something new. A white ribbon tucked just beneath the clasp of his cloak. Almost hidden, but not quite. You try to tell yourself it's nothing. A scrap, a memento. Doctors are human, aren't they? They feel, they remember, but not like this. Because the ribbon never moves. It never gets wet, never collects dust. It sits there, pristine, impossible. And when you stare at it long enough, you swear it pulses ever so slightly, like it's breathing. No one speaks of the girl anymore, but they remember the silence that followed. The village changed after her, not because of grief, no one had time for that, but because of something colder, a realization that the doctor doesn't just visit the dying. He visits the interesting, the defiant, the inconvenient, and sometimes the innocent. At night, the children whisper stories, that the ribbon isn't fabric at all, but a soul flattened and woven into thread. That if you touch it, you hear her voice, singing, begging, laughing. That the doctor chose her not because she was sick, but because she was curious. You try not to believe it, but then another girl disappears. and another. Always the ones who speak too freely, who draw too well, who ask too many questions. He doesn't mark their houses. He doesn't seal their doors. But the ribbon count grows. Sometimes in the morning mist, you think you see them. Shadows near his window. Small feet in the dew. Little palms pressed to the glass from the inside. Gone when you blink. The doctor says nothing. He never does. He simply continues. Measuring. Watching. Adding to his collection of things he cannot explain, but refuses to lose. The girl with the white ribbon? She might be gone, but her presence lingers in every note of unease, in every child now told not to talk to strangers, especially the ones in masks. And every time he passes, every time his cloak brushes the ground and his eyes settle on someone too young to know better, you wonder, was it curiosity that doomed her? Or did she know something? Something he couldn't afford to let go? Dicen que el tiempo no lo toca. That's what the old women say, clutching rosaries that long ago stopped meaning salvation. They whisper it with cracked lips over stew pots, over burial cloths, over the shallow graves they dig with hands that tremble more from fear than age. He doesn't wrinkle. He doesn't slow down. He doesn't age. And you've seen it too, haven't you? The others, what's left of them, grow thin. The tailor's spine curls like a question mark. The miller's beard has gone white and smells of dust. The priest coughs between every word of the sermon and forgets the name of God halfway through. But the doctor? He walks exactly the same. Same boots, same gait, same way of turning his head, like a clock hand that doesn't care who's watching. You remember when he first arrived. He looked like this, exactly like this. And now, seasons have changed. Frost has come and gone. Babies have been born and buried in the same year. And he looks younger than some of the children left behind. You try to reason with it. Maybe the mask hides it. Maybe he's just well preserved. Maybe he bathes in wine, or rubs nettles into his face, or eats only garlic. That's what the old stories say. But the truth is louder than superstition. He isn't aging at all. You start watching him more closely. He bends over a corpse the same way he bent over the mayor's son, back in the first weeks of the outbreak. He reaches into his bag with the same fluid motion you saw when you were still naive enough to think this would pass. No limping, no shaking, no wheezing, and worse, his eyes. Behind the mask, through the round glass lenses, there's no dimming, no exhaustion, no flicker of regret, just cold, still calculation. You ask your neighbor, quietly, how old she thinks he is. She says he must be in his 30s. You nod, but then you remember. Your father said the same thing. And your father died 6 years ago. And the doctor still looked 30 back then. That's when the questions begin to rot in your chest. What is he? Some say he made a deal. Not with God. God stopped answering letters long ago. But something else. Something beneath the ground. Something behind the mask. They say he doesn't eat. No one's seen him do it. He doesn't stop at the baker. Doesn't ask for broth. Doesn't sip water from the village well. He just moves. House to house. Grave to grave. Breath to breath. Feeding, perhaps, on something you can't see. Not with your eyes, but with your fear. One night, a shepherd swore he saw the doctor standing in the field under the full moon. No mask. No hat. Just a silhouette. Arms open. Face lifted. The sheep wouldn't go near him. The air crackled like a storm that couldn't find the courage to strike. And when the shepherd blinked, the doctor was gone. The sheep died that night. All of them. No wounds. Just stillness. There are stories, too many to count, that he was never born. That he rose from the last breath of the first plague. That he is what the disease becomes when it learns to walk on two legs. You try not to believe it. You cling to reason, to prayer, to the idea that he's just a man doing a terrible job in a terrible time. But then you pass him in the lane, close enough to feel the shift in the air. And for the briefest second, through the edge of the glass lens, he blinks. Not once, not twice, but in a way that feels delayed, rehearsed, like a thing pretending to remember how blinking works. And suddenly, the question isn't, why hasn't he aged? It's, what did he trade to stop the clock? And how long until the mask forgets the man entirely? You walk past a graveyard now, and you can't explain it, but something feels wrong. Not the usual wrong of sorrow and rot. Not the weeping of fresh mothers or the ache of fresh earth. No, this is a different kind of silence. A strategic silence. A curated emptiness. At first glance, it's almost beautiful. The rows are neat. The ground is smooth. The crosses are clean, and the air smells of dew and wood smoke. There are no flies, no crows, no stench of open bellies, which would make sense if the dead had stopped coming. But they haven't. You know this because you've seen the wagons, still rumbling through the village at dusk, carrying sacks that don't move, limbs that poke out like questions left unanswered. You've seen the doctor standing beside the cart, scribbling into his ledger with one hand while the other adjusts something in the sack, something that twitches just once before falling still. And yet, when you visit the graveyard the next morning, there are no new graves. The earth is undisturbed. No mounds, no fresh dirt, no shovel left leaning against the chapel wall. The grave digger says nothing now. He used to wave, used to hum while he worked. Now he just stares when you pass, as if trying to remember whether he's buried you already. You begin to count. A week goes by. More dead, more carts. Still no graves. You confront the priest, who stammers something about mass burials outside the village to save space. But you know the land. You've walked it. There's no new burial pit. No fresh markers. Nothing but dry grass and silence. The dead aren't being buried. They're being taken. But where? Some say the doctor found a better place. That he burns them somewhere deep in the woods, in fire pits that speak in tongues. Others whisper that he doesn't dispose of them at all. That he keeps them. For study. For ritual. For companionship. And sometimes, if you wake early, just before the sun has fully broken the sky, you might see him walking past the graveyard gates. Not into them, just past, as if checking, as if confirming that it remains empty. And you feel it again, that cold in your gut, that gnawing sense that graves should never be this neat, that morning should leave a mess, that the world should look like what it's lost. Instead, you're left with perfection, a graveyard that doesn't match the math. And the dead? They've gone quiet, too quiet. Even the dreams have changed. You used to see their faces, their outstretched arms, their pleas for light. Now you just see a hallway, stone walls, a flickering candle, and the sound of dragging. Not footsteps, not breathing, just something being pulled. And behind it always is mask. Not watching, not chasing, leading. It's then you realize the graveyard isn't empty by accident. It's empty because someone wants it that way. Because there's something worse than death now. Something after. And the only thing louder than screaming is a place that should echo with sorrow, but instead echoes with nothing. You never thought wax could breathe, but then again, you never thought a mask could look back at you. It begins on a night soaked in moonlight, when the village sleeps in uneven patterns, and the wind stirs the curtains like a nervous child tugging at your sleeve. You're restless, your mind thudding against the walls of your skull, half awake and half terrified of what waking might reveal. So you rise. You step outside, and there he is, standing at the edge of the chapel wall, unmoving, unblinking, bathed in silver light, so sharp it feels carved from bone. His black cloak absorbs it, but the mask reflects it, and for the first time, you see it up close. Not through fog, not through fear, but in the sterile stillness of a sleepless night. And what you see, it's melting, not all at once, not dramatically, but slowly, like a candle burning from the inside out. A bead of wax trails down the side of the beak. Another gathers at the temple, swelling like a blister before falling. You blink, rub your eyes, but the moon holds steady. This isn't a trick of light. This isn't dew. This is the mask unraveling. And beneath it, you swear something moves. Not a face, not a man, but texture, a glimpse of rawness, a shimmer of something that doesn't belong on skin, something that doesn't reflect the moonlight. It consumes it. You want to turn away. You should, but your body forgets how. Because the mask, though melting, isn't falling. It's holding, changing, like skin that doesn't want to leave the body, but also doesn't want to stay. You remember the stories now, of the priest who said the doctor never removed the mask, not even in confession, of the child who screamed, not because he saw what was under it, but because he saw that there was nothing under it at all. And now, here you are, a witness to the wax weeping down his face, to the soft hiss it makes when it touches the cold stone beneath his feet, to the strange warmth in the air, thick, sweet, unnatural. You try to find logic. Maybe the mask is sealed with wax for protection. Maybe it's part of some purification ritual. Maybe he stood too close to a fire earlier and didn't notice. But then, why does the wax keep falling upward? Yes, upward. One curl of it lifts against gravity, trailing like smoke in reverse, and disappears into the mask's eye hole, like it's being pulled in, or called. And that's when it hits you. The mask isn't melting. It's feeding. On wax. On light. On memory. On you. And just when you think it will turn, just when the curve of the beak begins to tilt toward you, you run. You don't look back. Because some truths are not meant to be survived. In the morning, the mask looks the same. Dry, polished, untouched, no trace of wax, no scent of smoke. But your floorboards creak differently now. Your windows don't close all the way. And your dreams are lined with wax. It drips slowly down your spine in sleep. It gathers in your ears. It seals your mouth. And somewhere in the distance, you hear breathing. Not yours, not his, just something patient, waiting for the next moon, waiting to melt again. Not because it's dying, but because it's shedding. Because maybe the mask was never meant to stay sealed. Maybe it's not protection. Maybe it's cocoon. You hear the hooves before you see the man. 4 of them, pounding through the mud with the arrogance of someone who believes that distance equals safety. That knowledge equals immunity. That titles, quills, and golden buttons can stop a plague that doesn't care if your name has a Latin suffix. The doctor from the capital has arrived, and he looks exactly as you expected. Broad-brimmed hat, not for ritual but for fashion. A coat too clean, boots polished, even after the ride. His gloves are silk, not leather. His mask, shorter, sleeker, ornamental, like a theater prop rather than armor. He rides in with papers tucked under one arm, orders stamped, seals cracked. He is here on behalf of science, of order, of truth. He dismounts and announces himself like someone who has never been ignored before. I am here to audit your plague doctor. He says, the village doesn't know whether to cheer or hide, because part of them still clings to hope that someone, anyone, might take control of what's happening here. That the man in black might be questioned, unmasked, replaced. But another part of the village, the part that's seen the empty graveyard, the twitching sacks, the ribbon above his door, that part knows better. The capital doctor doesn't wait long. He walks straight to the doctor's quarters, boots echoing like a countdown. You follow him with your eyes, though you pretend not to. Everyone pretends not to, but the tension threads through the air like spider silk. And then he knocks. 1, 2, pause. The same rhythm the plague doctor uses when marking a door. The door opens. Just a crack. You catch a glimpse of the beak. The curve of it, darker than usual in the shadow. They speak, not loudly, not angrily, just long. No one hears the words. But the capital doctor begins to sweat. Not because of illness, but because his silk gloves start to shake. Later that day, he walks through the village. Not with confidence now, but with confusion. He interviews families. He inspects homes. He stops at the graveyard and stares. For a long, long time. You pass by him once, close enough to see the change in his eyes. There's no recognition in them now. No superiority. Just the hollow stare of a man who has touched something he can't name. That night, the capital doctor stays in the inn. Alone, he locks the door, burns incense, and writes furiously in a leather-bound book. The next morning, he is gone. No farewell, no announcement, just vanished. The horse remains, tied to the post, still saddled, still restless, but no rider. The villagers pretend he left early, but the innkeeper, trembling, says she heard something around midnight. A voice, low, calm, steady, speaking Latin she didn't understand. And then silence. Not absence. Absorption. Later that week, the plague doctor walks through the village as he always does. Same boots, same stick, same unhurried pace. Except now, beneath his cloak, near the hip, you notice a folded paper. Just a corner of it. You catch a glimpse of the capital seal. Cracked, blood-stained, tucked away like a receipt. And somewhere in the woods, far from the road, foxes circle something that used to breathe. Something half-buried. Something wearing silk gloves. But the face is gone. Not rotted. Not torn. Just gone. As if it had been removed. Gently. Professionally. The way a man removes a mask. The way a plague removes hope. And the village? It says nothing. Not out of fear anymore, but because silence has become a second language. And because deep down they know the capital sent a doctor, but the village kept its monster. It begins as all desperate things do, with fire, a decision made not by leaders, not by priests, not even by the sick, but by the exhausted, the ones who have watched too many carts go by, the ones who no longer bother to name the dead, the ones who have come to believe that there is something inside the village that must be purged. They whisper the plan into dirty palms behind shuttered windows. They don't say it aloud, not really, because if they said it with conviction, the plague doctor might hear, but somehow he knows anyway. They strike at night, under a crescent moon that hangs like a blade in the sky. They move like ghosts with oil-soaked rags and trembling hands. They douse the cottages first, the abandoned ones, the infected ones. Then the stables, then the chapel, and finally, his house. It's old, wooden, dry as a promise broken too many times. They set it ablaze from all four corners. The flames catch quickly, hungrily, leaping like they've been waiting. For the first time in weeks, the village is alive with light. But there is no cheering. No one breathes. They wait. They stare. They count the seconds as the walls groan and the roof begins to fold inward. Surely this is the end. And then he steps out, not running, not screaming, walking through the front door, through the fire, through the smoke so thick it could crush a lung. His cloak is unburned. The mask gleams in the flickering light. The beak, now lit with amber glow, seems to stretch longer in the heat, like a smile being pulled taut. No ashes cling to him. No burns mark his gloves. He does not cough. He does not choke. He just watches. The villagers scatter. They don't speak of it, ever. Not after that night. Because how can you describe the feeling of trying to burn something that isn't wood or flesh or man? You start to think of him differently after that. Not as a doctor, not even as a monster, but as something more elemental. A constant, like drought or winter or death itself. The chapel burns to the ground. The priest is never seen again. The children won't enter the square anymore because they swear they can still see the flames when they close their eyes. They say they dream of the doctor walking through fire. But in the dream, he doesn't wear the mask. And what's underneath is worse. Not a face, not bone, just a hole. A black, gaping void, wide enough to swallow prayers. The next morning, he rebuilds. Not his home. That remains a smoldering skeleton. But the routine. He marks 3 doors by sunrise. Visits 5 more before noon. He carries no grudge. No vengeance. Which is somehow worse. Because it means he expected this. Planned for it. Perhaps even allowed it. After all, fire is a kind of cleansing. And no one knows that better than a doctor who never truly touches the infected. You look at him differently now. Not with hope, not even with hatred, but with resignation. Like a dog tied to a post, watching the thunderstorm it cannot outrun. The village burns, but he survives. Because he always does. Because maybe he isn't here to treat the plague. Maybe he is the plague, dressed in black, wearing your silence, and walking, always walking, toward the next house that still dares to stand. It always begins with the sound, not a scream, not a cough, not the weeping of a widow or the crack of firewood splitting in the night. Boots, heavy, rhythmic, measured, like a pendulum dragging itself across a dirt floor. You dream of them often now. Not the mask, not the plague, just the boots. You hear them walking down corridors that don't exist, echoing through rooms you've never entered. But somehow remember, the floorboards creak in your sleep. Not once, but twice. Creak, pause, creak, closer, always closer. You don't see him. You never do. Because in the dream, the mask isn't necessary. In the dream, he doesn't need to announce himself. The boots are enough, and they don't rush. They don't run. They move like they've already won. You wake up breathless, covered in sweat. Sometimes you find yourself staring at your door. No sound, no shadow, but you check it anyway, because part of you still isn't sure the dream ended. It's not just you. Everyone in the village has started hearing them. Some in sleep, some in broad daylight, with no one around. The carpenter hears them behind his workshop, on dirt paths where no one walks. The midwife hears them outside the barn, on nights when no births are expected. Even the gravedigger hears them, coming up behind him as he digs a hole no one asked for. And every time they turn, there's nothing, just the silence of something that was never there, or something that no longer needs to be seen. It should be absurd. Boots? Why not the mask? The stick? The plague itself? But you know the answer, because the boots are the first thing you hear before you die. Before the knock, before the ritual, before the smell of cloves and decay. You hear those slow, deliberate steps, and they're always coming for someone. Once a child asked what they were made of. You almost said leather, but leather doesn't make that sound. That wet, dragging thump, that almost hollow beat, like something walking in shoes it wasn't meant to wear. You say nothing, because how do you explain that the boots are no longer just his? They are a language, a rhythm, a spell cast in footsteps, and they're everywhere now. The cobbler swears he never made them. No one recalls him buying them. But there they are, perfectly fitted, always spotless, even after the rains. You try to rationalize it. Maybe he polishes them each night. Maybe he carries a second pair. But you've seen the mud in the village, the sticky kind that remembers every footstep. And yet, his prints never stay. They appear just long enough to frighten you. And then they're gone, wiped away like they were never meant to be traced. As if the earth itself conspires to keep his path secret. And then one night, you dream again. But this time, you're not lying down. This time, you're standing in a room you don't recognize. Dark, stone, cold, and you hear them. Thud, 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 The boots are coming. Not fast, not cruel, just inevitable. You try to scream. Nothing comes. You try to run. Your feet are rooted in wax. And then a shadow stretches across the floor. Long, narrow, and at the edge of it, just visible, the tip of a boot. Still, waiting. You wake up gasping. And in the quiet, in the deep stillness of your room, you hear it. Creak, creak. 2 steps from your hallway. Not in your dream. Here, you freeze. The air thickens. You want to believe it's just the wood or the wind or your mind playing tricks. But the truth is simpler. He doesn't need the plague anymore. Not to find you. He only needs time. And footsteps. Because eventually, you will all learn the same lullaby. The sound of boots. And what they mean. It was just a boy. Small, sharp-eyed, and always barefoot, even in frost. He didn't speak much. Not to people. Only to animals, to trees, to the kind of shadows that never seem to leave when the sun rises. No one paid him much mind. Not until the day he followed the doctor. They say it happened on a Tuesday. The boy had been watching for weeks, hiding behind barrels, slipping under carts, pressing his body flat against stone walls just to trace the path of that man in black. And on that day, he followed him beyond the village, beyond the burned chapel, beyond the well where the water had begun to taste like rust and memory. He followed the doctor into the woods. He didn't return for 2 days. When he finally stumbled back, his lips were cracked and his eyes were wrong, wide but distant, alive but hollow, as if he had seen something so old, so deep, that it had rewritten the inside of his skull. They found him sitting in the graveyard, not among the tombs, but in the empty rows, the ones that should be full. He was whispering to the ground, not crying, not shaking, just speaking like he was carrying on a conversation he had been having long before he was born. When they asked him what he was doing, he smiled. Not like a child smiles, but like someone who knows something they wish they didn't. He said, "They're not gone. They're still speaking, but only if you listen sideways." The villagers thought it was fever. They brought broth, prayed over him, offered rosaries and cold cloths. But he refused to eat. He only sat and whispered and sometimes laughed. Not the laugh of joy, the laugh of someone who's heard a joke told by the dead. Eventually, the priest tried to intervene, brought holy water, tried to exorcise whatever it was the boy had brought back from the woods. But the boy just looked at him and said, "You can't bless bones that already belong to someone else." That night, the priest fled. No explanation. Just robes left on the altar and footprints leading out of town. After that, people stopped approaching the boy. But they watched. They watched as he began to collect things. Small things. Teeth. Twigs. The occasional rib, too small to be animal. He arranged them in circles, patterns, shapes no one understood. And every time the plague doctor passed, the boy would look up and nod. And the doctor nodded back, as if they were colleagues, or disciples of the same God, just in different uniforms. You tried to ignore it. We all did. But one day you passed by him, and he looked straight at you and whispered, "You're going to be next. But don't worry. He'll keep your hands. You have kind hands." You laughed, uneasily. But that night, your sister started coughing, and the doctor came to your door. And now, you wear gloves even when you sleep, just in case. The boy doesn't speak to people anymore, only to the bones, only to the dirt. Some say he's begun to hum, just like the doctor. A low, circular sound with no melody, no beginning, and no end. And when he hums, the dogs bark. The birds fall silent. The graveyard trembles. You used to believe death was the end. But now, thanks to the boy, you understand. Death is just the first language. The rest is learned slowly, bone by bone. And somewhere, in the space between your heartbeat and your breath, you know you'll learn it too. Eventually, because he's listening. Because the bones are listening. And one day, you'll whisper back. You used to believe the dead were silent. That once the breath left the lungs and the eyes rolled back into whatever place they go, that was it. Stillness, silence, soil. But now, when the village is deep in sleep, when even the insects have stopped humming and the wind holds its breath, you begin to hear them. Voices, not like yours, not like anyone's. Low, fragile, threaded through with something not quite human and not quite gone. And you know where they come from. The doctor speaks to the dead, not metaphorically, not in grief or ritual. He speaks to them as though they're standing right beside him, as though death is just a new social class he's grown comfortable attending to. It happens just after midnight, always midnight, as if he's waiting for the veil between breathing and rotting to thin itself out, as if time itself opens a little door at that hour, and he's the only one with a key. You've seen it. He kneels near the edge of the graveyard, not in the marked rows, but in the empty stretch where grass never grows, where the ground feels hollow, like it's holding its breath. He places one gloved hand flat to the earth. The other hand stays over his chest. And then, softly, steadily, he begins to speak. Not out loud exactly, but not inside himself either. The words come like steam, as if whispered into the cold air and caught by something just out of sight. You move closer once. Just once. Close enough to hear the Latin. But it's not the Latin the priest used. This Latin curls. It slithers. It doesn't seek translation, it seeks submission. And what disturbs you most isn't the sound. It's the response. Yes, something answers. Not with speech, not clearly, but with rhythm. A thud in the dirt, a rustle where there is no wind, a vibration beneath your toes, like someone knocking politely from underneath your grave. He nods to it, as if they're debating, negotiating, reviewing terms. You've never seen anyone so at peace with the unnatural. His voice deepens as the exchange continues. He tilts his head, listening like a scholar deciphering ancient text. He begins to repeat words, carefully, intentionally, like they've asked him to, like they've corrected his pronunciation. Once you hear a name, spoken clearly, a name that belonged to a girl who died 2 weeks ago. A girl whose body was never returned, whose mother still waits by the door, holding her shawl, pretending not to notice the silence. And the doctor, he says the name not as a question, but as a summons. And then something moves. You don't see it, but you feel it. A drop in temperature that doesn't come from the wind. A smell, not rot, not herbs, but old rain and fresh blood. A tension in your throat, like someone reaching through you, pulling from inside. You run, because you finally understand. The plague doctor is not just a man, not just a mask, not even just a messenger. He's become a medium, a bridge between the before and the after. And whatever waits on the other side has found him useful. He's not mourning the dead. He's managing them, tending to them like a flock, feeding them information, gathering whispers, and sometimes giving them names to remember. Maybe yours, maybe not yet, but one day you'll lie down, too tired to speak, too cold to pray, and you'll hear it, a voice calling your name. Soft, low, steady, not from heaven, not from hell, from beneath. And he'll be there, listening, smiling, translating. It's not sudden. Not a crash, or a shout, or a miracle gone wrong. It happens slowly, so slowly, in fact, that no one remembers the last time the bell rang. At first, you think it's just the priest's absence. He hasn't been the same since the boy in the graveyard started speaking in riddles. He barely gave mass. He muttered during confession. He started sprinkling holy water on shadows, not sinners. Then one morning, the doors are simply closed, not by storm or by sin. Locked. The great wooden beams, once left open even during snow, now bolted from the inside. A thick iron bar crosses them, too heavy to lift without two men. And nailed to the door is a sign. Blank. No words. Just a parchment curled at the edges, as if someone had tried to write the truth and thought better of it. You try the handle anyway. You knock. You press your ear against the door. Nothing. No chanting. No candles. No sound of shoes scuffing the stone floor. Just the cold breath of a space that used to be holy. The next day, the stained glass windows go dark. One by one, candles no longer flicker behind them. The sun no longer kisses the faces of saints. The Virgin's eyes seem to follow you as you walk past, but not with compassion, with pity. The villagers grow uneasy. There is no mass, no marriage rites, no blessings for the sick. The dying must whisper their own prayers now, if they remember how. Someone says they saw the priest leave. At dawn, no bag, no robe, just barefoot, mumbling into the air like someone trying to argue with a ghost. He left the front door open behind him, and the doctor was seen entering an hour later. Alone, no one saw him come out, and that's when the humming starts. Low, faint, but constant, pouring out from beneath the doors of the locked church. Not song, not worship, a pulse, like a heart too big to fit inside a chest. You walk past it quickly now, even in daylight. You used to feel safe near the church. You used to press your palm to the cool stone and feel something steady there. A kind of quiet that reminded you the world, despite everything, still had a spine. Now you feel watched. Not by God, not even by the doctor, but by the walls themselves. You catch glimpses inside through the cracks. Figures moving, but too tall, too thin. Not people, or at least not anymore. You swear the crucifix above the altar is upside down now. But you can't confirm it, because to do that, you'd have to go inside. And no one does that. Not since the girl with the missing hands walked in and never walked out. Not since the cobbler's wife was found on the steps, barefoot and smiling. Eyes open, mouth full of white ash. You ask yourself, what happens when the sacred becomes infested? When the very ground that once held your prayers now holds something else? Maybe the doctor needed more space, more silence, more reverence, and maybe the church, abandoned, hollow, and aching to be used, offered itself. No questions, no hymns, just echo and stone and a roof that doesn't mind what it shelters. Some say the doctor is converting it, not into a hospital, not into a sanctuary, but into a mouth, a place that swallows what the plague leaves behind, a second death. For those who didn't die correctly the first time, you believe it, because the longer the doors stay closed, the less you remember what the church ever smelled like. And all you smell now, when you pass by, is herbs, wax, and something beneath that. Not decay, rebirth. No one expects it. Not really. You don't wake up one morning and feel clean. There is no trumpet, no rainbow, no chorus of angels peeling back the sky. It doesn't even happen on a special day. It just happens. One morning, the coughing stops. The door marking stops. The grieving slows like a song that's finally run out of verses. You wake up, and for the first time in what feels like centuries, the silence isn't terrifying. It's peaceful. You hear birds again. They sound like strangers, like a language you used to speak before everything tasted like vinegar and loss. Children start to play in the square again, carefully, quietly, like their worried laughter might wake something beneath the soil. The baker opens her shutters. You cry quietly when you smell bread. Even the rats seem confused, as if death no longer pays rent here and are being evicted. There are no new graves, no fresh red ribbons. The carts creak only with hay, and slowly, one by one, the village begins to breathe. But he doesn't leave. The plague doctor, The one with the perfect boots and the beak that never bends. He stays. He still walks the same route every day. Still hums under his breath. Still taps on doors with that silver stick that never tarnishes. You watch him walk past a house untouched by death, and still he stops. Still he marks it with chalk. Still he lingers by the window, as if expecting someone to collapse. But no one does. The people start whispering again, not the fearful whispers of disease. Now it's a question. Why is he still here? At first, the answer seems obvious. Maybe he's waiting. Maybe he's cautious. But weeks pass, then months, and still, he roams the streets like a shepherd without sheep. Like an actor who refuses to leave the stage after the play has ended. The crops begin to grow again. Laughter becomes less hesitant. The cobbler makes shoes. The blacksmith hums. But the doctor? He's unchanged, unaging, unblinking, unfinished. Some say he was never here for the plague, that the illness was just an excuse, that the real infection, the one that brought him, never left. And if you look closely, you'll notice something. He never walks the same route anymore. It's no longer the perimeter of pain. Now it's circles. Slow, widening circles around the town. Like he's measuring something. Tracing an invisible sigil into the earth. Preparing. But for what? You remember when the plague came. You remember the first knock. The first fever. The first burial where no one was allowed to weep too loudly. But now, what you remember most is the waiting. Because the plague is gone, but he is still here. Which means, maybe it wasn't the plague at all. Maybe he was the storm, and the sickness was just his shadow. And now that it's past, the sky should be clear. But instead, it's quiet. Too quiet. And the air? It's heavier. Not like fear. Not like grief. More like anticipation. Like something that has paused. Not ended. And deep in your gut, beneath the joy and the hunger and the fragile hope returning to your bones, there's still a voice whispering. The disease is over. But the doctor has only just begun. It's strange, isn't it? How easily the memory slips. Not like a cup falling from your hand, but like breath in winter, visible then gone. You try to remember when he arrived. The doctor, the man in black with the beaked mask, the unblinking stillness. The boots that always fell in time. You ask your neighbors. The baker, the weaver, the midwife who hasn't lost a child since midsummer. They all hesitate. Frown, look to the sky as if the clouds hold answers. And then they say something that chills you more than the disease ever did. I don't know. I thought he was always here. But that can't be true. Can it? You remember the day the fever took your uncle. The day the carts rolled heavy with bodies. The day the well turned sour and the chapel bell cracked. But you don't remember who first called him. Was there a letter? A messenger? A promise whispered in Latin at midnight? You remember his silhouette before you remember his name, which is convenient, because he never gave one. You never questioned it, because when someone walks like death and speaks like scripture, you don't ask where he came from. You just hope he leaves. But now, as the village heals and the crops rise and the birds sing, now, when his presence feels more out of place than ever, you try to stitch the pieces together. Where did he stay that first night? Who gave him a bed? Did he eat? You remember watching him work. You remember the scent of herbs and rot and something far older. But the beginning? Blank. You find the old woman who keeps records. She writes everything down: births, deaths, harvests, weather. You ask about the doctor. Her hands, crooked with time, fumble through the pages. She reads aloud entries from the plague's first weeks. Fever in the blacksmith's daughter. Rain for 3 days. 3 pigs stillborn. No mention of him. Not once. Then she flips to the page before the outbreak. Reads again. Feast of Saint Elmo. Bread spoiled. Crows nesting in the chapel's steeple. Still nothing. She turns to you with eyes fogged but sharp. Maybe you didn't come, dear. Maybe he just surfaced. That night, you lie in bed, staring at the ceiling, heart slow and uneasy. And it occurs to you, the doctor never aged. Not a wrinkle, not a limp, not a thread out of place in his long coat. His gloves were never torn, his boots never muddied. And maybe, just maybe, he didn't arrive at all. Maybe he was called, like a fire is called by friction, like a shadow is called by flame. Or worse, maybe he was already here, underneath, between, just waiting for enough death to make him visible. And now that you're looking, really looking, you begin to see him elsewhere. Not just in your village, but in the stories told in hushed tones in towns downriver. In woodcuts that predate your grandparents. In a tapestry hanging in the chapel before the doors were sealed, where a black figure stood among angels and demons, beak like a crescent moon. The colors faded, but the shape, unmistakable. You can't say when he came. But now, you begin to wonder if the better question is, when will he leave? Or worse, will he? Because what if he's not a doctor? Not a man? Not even a curse? What if he's the wound itself? Not the blade, not the fever, but the quiet, aching space where life used to be. And if that's true, then the real plague wasn't the disease. It was him. At first, it sounds like the wind. That soft, hollow tap, like a branch brushing too politely against your shutters. You ignore it, because it can't be. Not anymore. The plague is gone. The air has softened. You've tasted apples again. But then it comes again. 3 knocks. Not hurried. Not panicked. Just confident. You freeze. Because you know that rhythm. Everyone does. It's the kind of sound that rewires your spine. Makes your hands tremble before your mind catches up. It's a sound you haven't heard in months. A sound you prayed would never return. The doctor is knocking again. You don't move. No candle. No reply. You pretend you're not home. Like he doesn't already know. But the knock repeats. Not louder, just more certain. Like a reminder. Like a suggestion. You can ignore me. But I never really left. When it finally stops, you exhale. And for a moment, you believe you're safe. Until morning. When you find a chalk mark on your door. The symbol. You don't know what it means. It's not a cross. It's not a letter. It's a shape that curves and closes in on itself. Like a noose learning how to write. You see it on others too. The butcher's door. The well. The old schoolhouse that burned in the spring. No one speaks of it. Because if you say it out loud, you're admitting it's happening again. But it doesn't feel like before. No one is sick. No one coughs. The fever hasn't returned. And yet, you feel something watching from corners. Not eyes. Something heavier. Something with memory. And then one night, he comes back. Not through the square. Not from the chapel. From a forest. He walks differently now. Not the slow, measured pace of a man tending to the ill. Now it's reverent. Like he's walking through a temple made of rot and memory. He carries no bag, no vials, no ledger, just his stick, his boots, and something behind his mask that now feels less like breath and more like smoke. People watch from windows, holding their children, their prayers, their guilt. He pauses at each door with a mark, taps 3 times. No one answers, because everyone knows what answering means. You're volunteering. You're confirming your place in the pattern. The knocking continues for 7 days. No one is taken. No one is cured. Just the sound. Again and again, scraping against your sanity. By the 8th day, someone breaks. The carpenter. He opens the door. He doesn't speak. Doesn't scream. Just stares. And the doctor stares back. Longer than necessary. Then he walks away. The next morning, the carpenter is still there. But something's different. He smiles too wide. His hands shake when he's not looking. He forgets how to say his daughter's name. You ask him if the doctor said anything. He says, "He told me I'm not sick, just unfinished." And then he laughs. You've never heard him laugh like that. The kind of laugh you hear when someone finds out they're not real. The knocking resumes that night. And this time it's not just doors. You hear on your window, on the cellar hatch, on the floorboards beneath your bed. You press your hands over your ears and sob quietly, hoping he'll skip your house. But you know he won't, because the doctor doesn't cure disease. He marks decay, catalogs it, gives it permission to bloom. And now, he's not knocking to take the sick. He's checking his harvest. The village looks almost normal now. Children chase chickens down the lane. The baker sings again while kneading dough. The market stalls bloom with apples, honey, and linen dyed in gentle shades of hope. But it's not the same. Not really. Because you can't unsee it. Can't unknow what passed through here. Or what stayed. The plague has no pulse anymore. But it left behind something that doesn't rot. Him. The doctor still walks the edge of the village. Not daily. Not predictably. Just enough to remind you he's still here. Still watching. Still measuring something only he understands. You once thought he'd vanish when the sickness did. Like mist after dawn. Like a nightmare that loses its teeth in the light. But now you see, he's not a visitor. He's a fixture. A stone too ancient to be moved. A story that repeats itself until you forget it wasn't always there. Some say he's tied to the land, that he's buried beneath it, and what you see walking is just the part that's surfaced, a symptom of the soil's memory. Others say he's a curse, not cast, but inherited, passed down like guilt, like a family heirloom forged from ash and breath. And then there are those who say something far worse, that he is mercy, not the kind you pray for, the kind you deserve. A quiet mercy, the kind that arrives with plague but stays for order. Because there's a balance in death, a mathematics of endings. And someone has to keep the books. You've seen it in the way he moves, in the way he lingers not where people die, but where they lie. The liars, the thieves, the husband who left his wife to bleed alone when he heard the first cough. He marked the door, but not for plague, for punishment. Because not all diseases begin in the body. Some bloom in the heart. And he harvests both. So the village continues. The roof is patched. The well runs clear. The grass grows tall around the gravestones again. But you all walk a little quieter now. Speak a little softer when you speak his name. If you speak it at all. Some pretend he never existed. They erase his mark from their doors. They burn the cloaks he touched. They whisper stories that he was just a fever dream in the collective grief. But some know better. They leave their windows cracked at night, just in case. Not to let him in, but so they don't have to hear the knock. Because sometimes it still comes. Soft, precise, 3 times. And sometimes it's not your door. It's the door next to yours, or the one across the square. And you lie awake, heartbeat like a funeral drum in your chest, wondering if it skipped you, or if he's just taking his time. You begin to understand something you couldn't name before. The plague was never the ending. It was the invitation. He was the guest. And now, he's the resident. Some say he never leaves. And maybe that's true, because he doesn't need to. He's not waiting for sickness. He is waiting for you. To forget. To stop watching. To live as if the ledger isn't still open, ink still wet. And when you do, he'll come again. Not with plague, not with fire, with something worse. Remembrance. And on that day, when the sky forgets how to be blue, and the bell tower rings for no one in particular, you'll open your eyes and he'll be standing there. Not new, not returned, just still. Because the truth is simple. You don't survive the plague. You survive with it, and he is what it leaves behind,